Now we're here at the first keynote speech. Director of the Public Policy and Research Limited, New Zealand, Dr. Bev James will give us a keynote speech. Please welcome her with a round of applause.
Thank you very much for the warm and kind welcome. I bring you greetings from New Zealand, and I'd just like to express my appreciation and thanks for the invitation to speak at this forum. The theme of ageing in place is important for us all, for our communities and for our settlements. I just want to say a little bit about myself. I've involved in research about housing, ageing in place and the ageing population. I'm also the chair of a community housing trust, which focuses on supporting people who are in housing need, which includes older people. And of course, I'm in the older age group myself, so I have a very personal interest in ageing in place. In my presentation, I will talk about the importance of ageing in place and what it means. It's about enabling older people to stay in their homes for as long as they wish, rather than living in institutional care. What is important about ageing in place is that people's independence and community ties are preserved as they grow older. Internationally, as has been noted today, there is an increasing interest in the benefits of ageing in place. And since the 1990s, we've seen a drop in the percentage of older people in institutional care across OECD countries and also New Zealand. Ageing in place is a strongly held aspiration of most seniors in many countries, including New Zealand. And in my presentation, I will use New Zealand as a case study of how ageing in place is implemented with examples of ageing in place programs. While my focus is on housing, an important aspect of housing is actually how the house connects the older person to their communities. These connections between house and community are essential for ageing in place. I'm going to talk about some innovative approaches in New Zealand to support ageing in place. And we find that innovation is often driven not by government, but by grassroots, by community organisations who are responding to local needs and circumstances. I'm also going to talk in my last couple of slides about some tools to support ageing in place, which were developed from our research. I'm using the framework here for my presentation, linking housing with ageing in place with the United Nations right to adequate housing, which I'm sure you are all very familiar with. Older people have a right to adequate housing just like anyone else. They have a right to legal security of tenure, to availability of services, to habitability, accessibility, housing in the right location, and cultural adequacy in housing. We look at some international research. It's clear we can summarize why adequate housing is essential for ageing in place. Adequate housing enables older people to retain their independence, to keep well and healthy, to help build their resilience and to maintain their resilience as they age. Adequate housing makes older people feel safe and secure. They can access services and home-based support. Older people's social connections are maintained and quality of life is enhanced. Adequate housing enables older people to enjoy a sense of belonging and a sense of identity, the ability to create a home and a place of belonging. This is crucial to enabling people to age well. The diagram on the right is adapted from the World Health Organization, and it shows how the environment can affect functional capability. Of course, good housing and urban design can push back the disability threshold by making it easier for people to live in and move around their homes and their communities. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Aotearoa, New Zealand. Aotearoa is the Maori name for our country. This gives you an overview of our population makeup and ageing. In official statistics, we have 4 main ethnic groups, and ethnicity is self-identification of ethnicity. New Zealand Europeans are the main group of the population, so that's people like me. Maori are the indigenous people. The Asian groups combine a lot of different Asian communities. They are a mix of long-term residents who've lived in New Zealand for generations and also new migrants, including from Korea. Pacific peoples is also a very diverse group from the islands of the Pacific. Many have lived for generations in New Zealand. The population is relatively young compared to some countries, younger than Japan, for example, and European countries, but similar to the age profiles of Korea, Australia, and Taiwan. The Maori and Pacific populations are especially young populations. And the New Zealand European population has the oldest population profile. Even so, all ethnic communities are aging. And combined with the aging population is the trend of single-person households. This is similar to international observations that people aged 65 and older are more likely to live at home. So increasingly, aging in place means living alone, and that has significant implications for aging in place policies. In New Zealand, and this is very similar to many other societies, we not only have a structural change, an aging population, we also have a tenure change, a structural decline in home ownership, and an increase in renting among older people. So both the numbers and the proportions of older renters will increase significantly over the next 2 decades in many Western societies. And this will affect the abilities of seniors to age in place. New Zealand traditionally has been a very high home ownership society, and in the past there has only been a very small rental sector. Now we find that about 20% of people aged 65 and over are renting, mostly in the private rental market, where about 2/3 of older tenants live. And there are more older people who retire with mortgages. Their income decreases with retirement, and so their housing situation becomes more vulnerable. That diagram on the right just shows the decline in home ownership and the gradual increase in renting among older people. Now, why focus on this tenure change? It's really evident from international studies that renting, especially renting in the private market, has detrimental effects to aging in place. It can affect things like tenure security and financial stability of older people. So that combination of an aging population and more older people in rental is a very significant issue. So what does ageing in place look like in New Zealand? It's been a policy of interest since the 1990s, and increasingly policies are reflecting the idea that people want to age in place. Like other countries, New Zealand has seen a trend for more older people to live in their own homes in the community, not in institutional care. We also see that a large proportion of those with dementia continue to live in their community, not in institutional care. They are mostly looked after by their spouse or their families. New Zealand has a universal old age pension that's provided to everyone, all citizens and permanent residents, at age 65. But it's a very modest amount. And in fact, it's based on the assumption that a person, when they're retired, they are a mortgage-free home owner. That is, they do not have a mortgage and they do not rent. So that again has significant implications for the ability of people to age in place in comfort. Also of note is in New Zealand, part of ageing in place is to have access to home-based care and support services. So there is some government funding for these services, but again, it is quite modest. There are a number of housing challenges for our older population. These are similar to those challenges reported in a range of countries, as noted by the United Nations and the OECD. They cover declining home ownership and tenure insecurity, unaffordable housing, unsuitable housing, housing located in the wrong place, and homelessness. I'm going to talk about each of these in the following slides. New Zealand does not look very good when you look at the tenure legislation. We have a lightly regulated rental market compared to many other countries, such as the United Kingdom, Australia, many European countries, and the United States. We only abolished no-cause tenancy termination in 2021. And already 2 of the major opposition parties want to repeal this recent reform. There are other reasons why older people feel insecure in their tenure. It's not only about limited legal protections, it's about things like unaffordable housing costs, harassment, and living in an unsafe dwelling, which may be dilapidated or lacking modifications so that they can move around safely. That quote is from one of the older renters, a couple who were involved in some of our research. Unaffordable housing can be unaffordable whether you are a homeowner or a tenant. The quotes there are from 2 of our participants. The one on the top is from an older homeowner who could no longer afford to live in her large family home. So she was able to move to a smaller house. The second quote is from an older woman who rents privately. She works to essentially afford her mortgage and basic living costs. These people's situations are not unusual. Unsuitable housing. Unsuitable housing covers many different aspects, and I've just picked out 3 here. One is the wrong size. It could be too big or it could be too small. The dwelling is unsafe. It's in disrepair. It's also poorly performing. It lacks comfort. In New Zealand, many of our homes are too hot in summer and too cold in winter. New migrants to New Zealand tend to be very shocked about the poor performance of our housing, and it's something that we are trying to improve. The photos there, again, 2 of our research participants who helped to design and test a repairs and maintenance guide for older people. I'll refer a bit to about that later. Inaccessible housing. New Zealand lags behind other countries that have accessibility standards for new residential buildings. Our building legislation only has accessible standards for public buildings, such as a building like a hotel or a bank office. There is no equivalent requirement for accessibility for private housing. You're probably quite surprised about that. One estimate is that only 2% of New Zealand's residential dwelling stock is accessible, and also that 1 in 6 people need home modifications to enable them to live safely in their homes. That is, they need a ramp for level access, or they need a wet area shower, or handrails or grab rails in order to actually move around safely in their homes. Of course, accessible design is hugely important for aging in place. It supports their health, it provides a safe environment, and it reinforces their independence. Both accessible design and home modifications have been found to delay entry into institutional care in later life. So to me, they are literally the foundation of aging in place. And of course, for older renters, to get home modifications is often quite difficult because they need the permission of the owner of the house, the landlord, in order to be able to do it. Challenges, again, location challenges. I've just picked out 2 here, which are significant in New Zealand. The first one is the house is not well connected to services, and we do not have extensive public transport networks in New Zealand. Therefore, if the older person is reliant on public transport, it is very difficult for them if they're not close to a public transport hub, or they cannot easily get to the services that they need. The second aspect of location is vulnerability to natural hazards. New Zealand is on the ring of fire, so earthquakes are very common. Flooding is also increasingly common with climate change. This year, we had the worst storm of the century, resulting in landslides and flooding, which affected 1/3 of New Zealand's population, and we are still dealing with those impacts at the moment. Increasingly, we see in coastal areas where most of our population lives are affected by rising sea levels to the extent that managed retreat, that is, shifting settlements or abandoning settlements, are being considered in our planning in different areas. That photo is an older person who participated in one of our research programs. He's standing in his kitchen and there has been a mudslide through his house and a metre of mud and water. So that is the sort of thing that faces older people and their ability to age in place. Sorry to be a little bit sort of depressing here, but homelessness among older people is increasing in New Zealand. And similarly with much of the international research, we find that there are more older people becoming homeless, often in later life. The main causes of homelessness are around their precarious rental situations. So they cannot afford their rent or their tenancy is terminated by their landlord. Most have had conventional employment histories and housing histories. They have not been marginal and vulnerable people until, of course, they are made homeless. That's photos from a newspaper article in 2018 with an old person living in their car. So what do older New Zealanders want from their homes? This is very, very similar to Australian research that I'm familiar with. Obviously, there are many things such as tenure security and affordability. All those things are really important. But another area that's often very important, looking at the design of houses, is around being able to access a private outdoor space, to have a bit of an outlook, even if it's just a view of the street. Very important for people's comfort and feeling of being at home, my place. Now I want to move on to some positive examples of community-based responses to ageing in place. These are grassroots initiatives. The first one is LifeMark. This is an example of best practice in universal design. LifeMark won an international award, which is ironic because it was developed in New Zealand, where there is no legislative requirements for residential dwellings to be accessible. So the photo is of the apartments built in Auckland by the Salvation Army Church. It has mixed ages in the tenants. It includes older people, like the tenant in the foreground on his mobility scooter. And built into the design are charging stations for mobility scooters in these apartments. All the ground floor apartments are suitable for wheelchair users. My next example is the Moa Crescent Kaumatua village, Kaumatua Amori older people. This was developed for older Maori people, but it also houses non-Maori. So this is affordable rental. The village and the houses were designed with the help of the Kaumatua themselves. And the photos are from a design toolkit that was produced from research about the creation of the village. I've brought with me a few copies of that design toolkit, which are available. The top photo there, oops, sorry, I just wanted to go back. Oh, maybe not. You've got it there in your books. The top photo is two of the tenants in their communal garden. Abbeyfield is another example of community innovation. This again is affordable rental. It's shared housing where older people live in a flatting situation. It's a type of housing model where some low-level support is provided. Residents are looked after by a housekeeper, and that photo shows the housekeeper and two residents making Easter buns for the Easter holiday celebration. This example is a little bit different. This is a community-led program focusing on helping older people to stay living independently in their homes. So it was started by a group of volunteers. It now has a paid coordinator, and the program runs a lot of educational events, social events, and links up volunteers with older members so that the volunteers do small tasks and jobs around the home. This is an example of what can be done in a small town in a very economically deprived area. It has a very high proportion of older people, but also a high proportion of young people under 15. And in fact, the coordinator is setting up an intergenerational program of activities so that young and old can share activities and socialize together. Home Share has just started in Auckland. It is run by Age Concern, a charity in Auckland that provides advocacy and support for older people. This program is funded through central government, through the Office for Seniors, and it aims to improve well-being and housing affordability for both the older homeowner and the boarder who comes to live with the homeowner. This is not an in-home carer. This is someone who provides a bit of help and companionship, but they do not provide extensive care for the older person who's still living independently. And just a few policy initiatives. Only just going to mention two of them, the ones in 2023. The first one is the long-term implications of our aging population for housing and urban development. This is a new policy framework which puts the emphasis on housing and the aging population. So this is a new development to have a policy framework, and that will drive future policy around housing and urban development. And the second one is the Waitangi Tribunal into Housing. The Treaty of Waitangi is New Zealand's founding document, and it underpins the relationship between Maori people and the Crown. And this inquiry is the first major investigation into the impacts of the state's housing policies and programs on Maori, who are particularly disadvantaged in the housing market. So that is ongoing at the moment. The findings of that will again influence future policy and programs. My last couple of slides are about our own research and the development of evidence-based tools. We found across several projects with older people that they were saying that they have difficulties in accessing housing information and making informed housing decisions. They have a wide range of housing needs, but there's not just one place, one organisation that they can go to find out about all the different complexities in the housing system. So these findings led us to develop some information and decision support tools to help older people to age in place. We co-designed those tools with older people. And I've just got 3 examples here. The first one is the Good Homes Repairs and Maintenance Toolkit, helping seniors to identify if there are some repairs or maintenance needed in their home. They can use this with their family members, this toolkit. And also we've noticed that organisations, community organisations are picking up the toolkit and using it with their clients. So the top photo there, which says kitchen, that's taken from the toolkit, and that's a checklist so people can go through their kitchen and identify if there are any safety issues or repairs and maintenance needed. And it goes through every room in the house, inside and outside. It's quite a comprehensive toolkit. The second one, My Home, My Choices, which is the bottom photo there, that is a decision support kit to help seniors to decide, should I stay in my home or should I leave? And what would the implications be? And are there things that I can do to my house to make it more livable and comfortable as I age? And finally, the Going for Good Renting Toolkit, there are 3 separate tools, 2 tools for tenants and 1 for landlords who have older tenants. In other words, encouraging landlords to think about how they can support their older tenants. The one pictured, the rapid reference, was suggested by older tenants themselves. They said, we need a quick reference, just a few pages. What are our rights? What do these terms mean? Like, what is a bond? And how do we deal with things like how do we actually apply for a rental? And how do I access some housing income support if I can't pay my rent? So we developed the rapid reference, which was test driven by older tenants. Just to conclude, these are what I believe are the housing essentials for aging in place. Obviously, to have universal design standards in residential housing regulations, to have tenure security and tenancy legislation, public investment, that is the state investing in affordable rental housing, resilient dwelling design and materials, enabling older people to have access to the information that they need so that they're well informed and can make good housing decisions. And finally, to have policies that are joined up across housing, income support, retirement income policy, care services, and health services. So thank you very much for listening. It's been an absolute honour and a pleasure. And I know that I'm going to learn a lot from the next 2 days. There are a few hard copies somewhere here of the Kaumatua housing toolkit, and also some copies of a booklet that we put out which summarises some of our research about ageing in place. So once again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. She focused on the seniors' rise to decent housing, and she gave us some examples in New Zealand. And the challenges for New Zealand's aging population are just like the cases in Korea: unaffordable housing and homelessness and location challenges. So it was a good opportunity to think about the housing essentials for aging population. Thank you very much.